Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks for joining us. Well, 8 years ago, Ray Nagin was on the verge of being reelected as mayor of New Orleans. But now, in the days before another mayoral election, Nagin is on the verge of going on trial. We'll preview the former mayor's day in court, and we will examine the election for sheriff. We'll also look at the latest on the Tulane scholarship issue, a drop in the city's murder rate, and our Future Watch segment looks at what to expect and fear as new street construction begins uptown. Fear and expectations are also part of the discussion as the Saints return to Seattle. Starting for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor of Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. First over to Gordon, and we're going to talk about former Mayor Ray Nagin's day in court, which is rapidly approaching. There was some activity that went on this week.
Yeah, it was pretty minor. Really, there was a status conference this week, but it's kind of the last step before the trial, unless there's some kind of late-term surprise in this thing, which there always could be. So the trial is scheduled to start 2 weeks from Monday. And they just went over some routine things. The reporters aren't allowed into these status conferences. It's just the lawyers, and then the judge puts out a minute entry afterwards saying what happened. But it was basically talking about some kind of ministerial things, where people get to sit in the courtroom, where the family gets to sit, where the press is going to sit. Some more important things like the jury questionnaires were agreed to. Some stipulations that both sides agreed to, like, for instance, sometimes the government has to prove in a case like this that the city receives at least $10,000 a year from the federal government in order to give the federal government jurisdiction. And they agreed to waive that burden of proof. So things like that. At this point, it looks like it's going to happen, unless, again, there's always the potential for some surprise. There could be a plea deal at the 11th hour or something we didn't foresee. It was really a surprise last time when it was delayed. So
remind us again, what charges are is the mayor facing? The former mayor, I should say, facing?
Yeah, I mean, I can't recite them all here from memory, but there's 20-something charges, and they're generally under the umbrella of corruption, but some of them involve allegations that he took bribes or kickbacks from vendors. That's kind of the central allegation in the case. And then there's some income tax evasion. They're saying he didn't pay taxes on these payments that were allegedly bribes, and also there's some money laundering, things like that. But it's all kind of related to these roughly $200,000 in illicit payments and gifts, chiefly in the form of granite that was given to the family's countertop business.
It's really not a complex case. It's simple, kind of old school bribery allegations.
Yeah, it's almost, for the mayor of a major city, it's not, it's a little bit of a, has a rinky-dink aspect to it. I mean, it's allegedly this family home improvement business that was taking some gifts on the side because I guess the business wasn't doing very well.
Some people were expecting that his sons may have been indicted. They were in charge of that business. The fact that that hasn't happened, does that say anything into the whole legal scheme here?
I mean, it says something. I'm not sure what it says, but there was a lot of speculation that might happen, and oftentimes the feds will do something like that as kind of a strong arm tactic to get somebody to take a deal. Like, I don't know if you all remember Greg Meffert, the mayor's chief technology officer, who was going to be a witness at this trial. The feds indicted his wife as well as him. She had some alleged role in that scheme, but it was a small role, and they did that, I think, in part to put the pressure on him to take a deal, which he did. And then they dropped the charges against the wife as part of that. And some people thought that could happen here, and it hasn't.
And an indictment against the sons, could cut both ways. It could nudge Nagin, the chief defendant, closer to a plea bargain. But on the other hand, it could look like the government's piling on and being vindictive. And now, at this late hour, it's almost,
I think it's
unfair and
off the table now, yeah.
Because it really would look like they're trying to stick it to him on the eve of trial.
It would look like they weren't prepared to go forward with their case at this point, I think, if they were to indict the sons.
Now, this obviously is a very serious situation with some serious charges, but it's also an historical situation too, isn't it? Is this the first time that we're...
Yeah, unbelievably, first mayor in New Orleans history to be indicted on corruption charges. So even though we have this reputation for being such a corrupt place, this has never happened before.
Well, there are a lot more things that are illegal now that weren't illegal back like in the machine days. And there are more techniques that investigators have to catch people than back in the machine days.
But basically, this case is old school in the sense that the main evidence are witnesses who have cut their own deals and have agreed to plead against the former mayor.
Right, and I think also combating political corruption has become a higher priority. I mean, I think some of these things, I'm sure there were mayors of New Orleans who did things like this before.
Some of these things were maybe just let go before.
Yeah, I don't think people cared as much.
Right.
One thing is clear, they're barreling toward trial. There was a filing even today quibbling over voir dire questions for the jury pool. And, they have to do that at this late stage. They have to be prepared for trial. But a plea bargain could happen at any time. It could be during jury selection. It could be during the course of the trial,
And
one
that's
side or
something
the
that
other.
we would find out, obviously, within the next 2 weeks, because the trial is scheduled to start 2 weeks from this
Monday,
coming
yeah.
Monday, right? Mike, we're going to go over to you right now and talk about the news for the murder rate for the city of New Orleans. It went down this past year. Should we feel a little bit safer, a little bit more at ease? What do these stats really mean for us?
Well, they were promising that the murder rate went from 193 in 2012 to 155 in 2013. Certainly, City Hall, Mayor Landrieu used as an opportunity to show that some of his programs were working and taking root. Police officers, and especially the rank and file police officers on the street, were a little less speedy to celebrate, as cops often have a certain gallows humor and superstitions about this sort of thing, and they know full well as soon as you start celebrating a downturn in crime, it can come back to bite you. And in some ways, it sort of has happened so far at the beginning of this year. There was a murder the first day of 2014. There were 3 others this week. So, police are very guarded. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that while this was being touted as a 40-year low in the raw number, 155, per capita, on a per capita basis, it is not the lowest. In 1999, during the era of Richard Pennington as police chief, he brought the murder rate to 158, which at the time when New Orleans was more populated before Katrina, that was a 42 per 100,000 murder rate. This past year, 155, with a lower population, it translates to 52 per 100,000. So, I'm sorry, let me get my numbers straight. Actually, in 1999, it was 32 per 100,000. Right, yeah. And 42 per 100,000 last year. So we're still a ways from a low per capita. And just to put things in even, a broader perspective, the national rate per capita is about 5 per 100,000.
What about shootings versus murders, too? I mean, there are a lot of people who say that ER doctors might just be better at saving people, so they don't become homicides.
Stabbings, too. We're seeing more incidents of stabbings.
Shootings edged down, not at this, the same clip as murders. And, let's face it, a non-fatal shooting could easily become a murder with a better aim, an ambulance that doesn't get there timely, moves by doctors in an emergency room. So that's another thing that where police officers who, live this every day on the street, they know to be very guarded because, let's look at the Mother's Day shooting of 19 people. Right. Almost miraculously, there were no deaths among those 19, but that easily could have been a multiple case of homicide. And the police know full well that with guns and shootings it's still an alarming rate for a city the size of New Orleans, and the police who are out there every day are not celebrating.
So efforts to continue to keep that murder rate down, to keep the crime rate down, but we're not there yet, basically. It's
a multi-pronged effort. It will continue to be, and another thing that's really important is you have to guard against one-year anomalies. You really want to see a trend, multiple years in a downward direction before you can really say that you've turned a corner.
I was going to say that if you go back to the previous low water mark of 1999, if you look at the year on either side of that, 1998 and 2000, you had over 200 murders in both of those years. Yeah. So it wasn't really a sustained drop.
So once again, efforts continue to bring it down, to continue having it go down. Thanks a lot, Mike. I'm going to go over to Dawn right now, and we're talking about street construction right now. That seems to be never ending, particularly in a certain part of town.
It is never ending in a lot of parts of town, but the project that should get everybody's eyes open right now is Napoleon Avenue. It's the SELA, or the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Project, put on by the Army Corps of Engineers. Its goal is to be able to help us out in major rainstorms and drain off a lot more water. Right now, under Napoleon Avenue, there's about an 18-inch drainage pipe. What they're putting in is called a box culvert, and this is a box under Napoleon Avenue that's big enough to drive a school bus through. So when you talk about the amount of rain that can go out of it, it significantly will improve the flood conditions in the uptown area during a major storm. Where it will impact all of us, or all of our viewers, is Mardi Gras, because you've got construction all along Napoleon Avenue. You've got orange fences, you've got contractor trucks. The work will shut down for the parades. The parades that come either from the Claiborne side of Napoleon or the Tchoupitoulas side of Napoleon will not be rerouted, but there's less neutral ground for people to stand on for those parades. The work gets compacted and gets locked away behind fences so that it is safe. Work that's going to start actually on Monday on the river side of Napoleon, or riverbound on Napoleon. As you've crossed over St. Charles, there'll be tree trimming, because the next phase of that box culvert project is to move traffic into the parking lanes and open up the neutral ground for work to be able to dig under there. So they have to trim all the trees along the parking lanes on both sides of the street. So parking is impacted, parade viewing is impacted. The end result of this project is not until 2016. It was impacted last year for Mardi Gras. It will be impacted this year in 2015 as well as 2016. I'm told the Army Corps of Engineers and the city did not receive major complaints at all from parade goers last year. They kind of understood what was going on with the work. It's limited, but it doesn't really, you can't bring out your whole couch, maybe only a couple of cushions this year. The other work that's going on, we've talked about several times on this show, is the railroad tie project on the streetcar. That project will completely shut down in advance of the parades as well, so that there will be space on the neutral grounds by the streetcars. So all of these contractors have to start and stop and start and stop. It increases the price of the work for sure, and the duration of the work, but it should be things people are looking forward to because of the improvements to both the safety of the streetcar and the flood protection.
We've talked about on this show that streetcar project is affecting the street lighting at night. There are parts of St. Charles that are pretty dark. There are parts of St.
Charles that are dark. They are bringing in temporary lighting for those areas. Bow Brothers is handling both phases of this Napoleon Avenue construction for the Army Corps of Engineers, local company. Obviously, they understand the importance of the parades to the people. But there are 11 parades this year that are not starting at Napoleon and Tchoupitoulas. They're actually moving their start, and not because of the construction, to Jefferson and Magazine area, and a little bit more space.
No, they're doing some work there, too. I don't know if that's going to be... I guess.
Just be prepared to just put on a smile and enjoy your parade without too much complaining, because in the end result is all these projects will help improve traffic and improve flood flow.
Will ladders still be able to go up on the neutral grounds?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Don. Talking sheriff's race now, Gordon. There was a forum that was held this week with, it was for different races, different elections, but sheriff's race was included in it. You did a piece on that. What did you see?
Well, I mean, it wasn't too surprising, but it was interesting. It looks like it's going to be a fairly nasty race. You've got a incumbent sheriff, Marlon Gusman, who's been kind of under siege in the last year. He's had to sign a consent decree with the federal government because of conditions in the jail, violence, suicides, inadequate mental health care, things like that. And there's also was an embarrassing video that surfaced this year that many people may have seen, where showing inmates snorting drugs and drinking beer and even leaving the jail and coming back and so forth. And he's also
that was from a couple of years ago, though.
It was several years old, and it surfaced this year,
Yeah.
correct?
Last
and then,
year in 2013,
right, in
yeah.
2013. And then you also have this major federal investigation that's ongoing into some of the contracting practices at the jail, and it's several high-ranking people working under Gussman are now in jail as a result, as well as a couple of contractors. So you've got all of that, and the candidates taking on Gussman are Charlie Foti, the former longtime sheriff, who was then Attorney General, who then lost a re-election bid for Attorney General, and you've got Ira Thomas, the school board president, and you've got this guy Quentin Brown, who's a gardener, who's kind of a perennial candidate, who's run for mayor, city council, et cetera. So you have all these currents in this thing, but basically what you have, what I saw the other night is Gussman blaming Foti for a lot of the problems that Gussman inherited, and a lot of people who have watched the jail for a long time think that in fact Charlie Foti did have a lot of problems there, and he just never came under the kind of scrutiny that Marlon Gussman did. So you've got Gussman blaming Foti for that, and then you've got Ira Thomas kind of attacking Gussman, both Foti and Ira Thomas attacking Gussman for basically what's in these federal consent decrees, and just saying this place is run terribly, and you're not showing any leadership, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty lively race, I would say.
But Gussman is also saying Katrina was a factor too, that Katrina delayed things
Absolutely, yeah, and of course it was. I mean, he's saying we had these antiquated facilities, which they did, and that Katrina made them much worse, and they're building a new jail now, and that everything's going to be better when they get this new jail online.
A much smaller jail than what Foti oversaw. And what's Foti's retort to all of these, the attacks on him by Gussman?
I mean, I think he says, look, the federal government never came in and made me sign a consent decree, and I didn't have, videos like this surface when I was sheriff. He can kind of say none of this
happened on my watch.
Yeah, and it didn't surface in the same way. But I mean, some people who have, if you ask like civil rights lawyers who have represented inmates for decades, they'll tell you that a lot of these problems existed.
Any endorsements yet for any candidate in the sheriff's race?
Yes, I'm trying to remember who's Marlon Gussman has gotten the bulk of the endorsements, and
Okay.
I'd say he's kind of the favorite going forward.
At this point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Tulane scholarships right now. Both of you guys have worked on this issue. It was something that sort of bubbled up in the 1990s when we saw that legislators who can issue scholarships, award a scholarship, were giving them perhaps to relatives or close relatives or themselves, and that was in the 90s, and we've seen changes since then. Where are we now with it?
Well, not only are we both working on it, it's been a collaborative series of stories that appeared both on TV and in the Advocate newspaper. And we uncovered some scholarships that were given to connected insiders. In many cases, we had some relatives of elected officials. We had people who were outside of the legislator's district who either gave campaign contributions or had some other connection. We had the son of a campaign manager of a state rep, Helena Moreno. And that seemed to be sort of the tip of the iceberg, given that we just looked at the past couple of years, and this really hasn't been scrutinized since the stories were first uncovered 20 years ago. So our efforts have led us to try to get a more complete picture. We've put in a public record request for all of the available records, including something that was added 20 years ago, which is a form that includes a disclosure checkbox where an applicant checks whether he or she is a relative of an elected official. And that would obviously give us a tally beyond what we were able to identify just by matching last names. So far, officially, the House and Senate have both denied us through their respective clerks. However, some individual legislators have come through, have bucked their leadership, and have provided those records. We're continuing to pursue those. We think that, in our opinion, those should be public records. Why have a disclosure box if it's not going to be disclosed.
And these are applications that students file? These are
That
the
is
records
correct.
you're talking about?
That is
Who are
correct.
seeking these scholarships, which are worth, what, over $40,000 a year?
43
now?
something, I think, per year. Yeah.
So it's a pretty lucrative perk that,
It is.
that can
Absolutely.
be handed
And
out.
it's interesting, we did get a couple of legislators right off the bat who indicated that they, wearing the mantle of good government or believing that these should be made public, who gave us these records, and in those cases, the check boxes show that the students that they selected were not relatives of elected officials, and it looks like some other legislators are taking note, and we've had a couple, including one today, who contacted me saying, I'd like to provide you those records also, going against
Is there
the
going to-
advice of his leadership.
Is there going to be some legislation coming up in this session?
I'll
regarding-
let Gordon handle that. We are seeing some results in the form of legislation.
Yeah, Dan Claytor, who's a state senator who's running for Congress, I believe. Is that correct? He's proposed legislation to basically take the awards out of the hands of the legislator and give them to Tulane, and he's proposed various other kinds of transparencies. I can't remember the exact details.
Including, prohibiting campaign contributions from
Right.
those families
and I
of
think,
recipients.
and I think and banning elected officials from.
Right.
I
Right.
think that's yeah. So,
So-
anyway, we'll see where that goes.
So right now, the regulations, does it allow for a legislator to give it to a family member or someone
Yes.
connected perhaps with the campaign?
It allows them to. They just have to disclose it. There's no barring of. I'm not sure if they
They
can.
can't give it to direct family
They
members.
can't give it to their
They
son, but
can
they can
give
give
it
it
to children of elected officials. However, part of the settlement of a lawsuit 20 years ago was that they now have to disclose that relationship to an elected official. And that's what we're being denied in our public
Our
record
view
request.
is that if you force the disclosure of these things, but you don't disclose them to the public, then it's not really disclosure at all.
So you're continuing to push for the disclosure of these records?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sure you'll keep us posted on that.
Absolutely.
Now to a very important issue, and that is the game tomorrow, the Saints versus Seattle. And the Saints are going back to Seattle, which was not a very friendly place when we were there last.
This is like old school TV. I'm like the sports guy at the end of the show tonight, I'll even give some weather. It's supposed to rain tomorrow in Seattle. Marcia, go back to the Saints championship season, 2009, 2010. I remember from the very beginning of that season, before the first game, you'd see these power rankings of how, what are the best teams. And from the very beginning of that season, the Saints were perceived as the number one team, as the most powerful team, and it stayed the entire season. It may have flexed a little bit after the Cowboys beat them, but for the most part, all season long, they were seen as number one. Of course, they got first seed, and they won the Super Bowl. This year, you look at those power rankings, from the very, very beginning, Seattle was seen as the number one team. I mean, all throughout the season. And if you saw the Saints, there was respect for the Saints, but usually they were seen as being a top 10 team, but they were never ranked. And so the fact that the Saints have gotten this far is quite respectable. And had they won one more game, or had Atlanta defeated Carolina, they would have wound up second seed, and they'd have a home game. They wouldn't have played. They wouldn't have played last week, and that would have increased their chances. But the Saints, quite obviously, face a very difficult task tomorrow. That stadium in Seattle. I don't know if you've ever seen an aerial view of it. To me, it looks like a huge taco shell on edge, because it's got these stands on either side that kind of go like this, and I guess it just captures the sound, but it's known for being one of the noisiest stadiums in the league, and it's just a very, very loud and a very, very difficult stadium to play in. Most of the predictions, no one is expecting the Saints to do as badly as they did in December. Still, most people think it's going to be a closer game, but Seattle's a favorite.
Hey, I'll go out on a limb and make that prediction that it will be closer than it was when they played the first time.
Well, it can't be worse. Hardly. I mean, you got to think. And the Saints have improved in several ways. They've improved their offensive line. They have a better running game. And a lot of people are saying the running game is going to be key to this tomorrow because of the rain and the wind. The running. I wish Pierre Thomas was in better shape, but the Saints have shown a stronger running game during the past few weeks, and so that's good. And it looks like they may have a kicking game back again, like a field goal kicker that they can rely on, because that had been a problem right there. That may have cost them the game against the Rams.
And a lot of people are looking at the fact that the Saints got stomped when they were in Seattle during the regular season, but within the Saints camp, they look at that as working for them. They, matched up. They have film and tape. They know the mistakes that need to be corrected. So getting a second chance, as they say, it's hard to beat a good team twice in the same season. So the Saints look at an advantage there, and maybe being an underdog, giving him a different mindset.
Yeah, I mean, there are several ways they're a better team than they were in December, but they're also a fatigued team too. I mean, they haven't traveled last week, and haven't traveled again, taking a long trip, by the way.
Well, certainly we have a community that's been reminded to believe because it's been in the skies. Right? I understand it was Ronnie Lamarck, you guys told me, who had the plane flying with the banner that said believe. And we do have a community that believes, so we're going to wish the Saints all the luck in the world. We know that you can do it. It's a tough, tough team that they're facing. And it's nothing unusual that Seattle's going to have rain. What's new there? How bad is the rain supposed to be? Do we know? I mean, is this going to be driving
the wind
rain?
is what's supposed to be bad.
The wind?
That's a bad combination, too. Rain and wind.
The rain's supposed to dry out before kickoff, but the wind is supposed to be significant.
All the more reason.
Which could eliminate that kicking game completely.
Yeah, but all the more reason why the running game is going to be important. And that hasn't been a strong point for the Saints this year, but it's looked better the last few games.
Well, this is not the last time we want to wear this. We
Right.
want to be able to
We wanna
wear
stay in
Fleur de Lis
Fleur de
one more
Lis.
time. Okay, looking ahead, Errol.
Well, currently mayors elected in February, a runoff in March if needed, and then inaugurated in May. Yesterday, the council passed a resolution calling for a home rule charter amendment vote in November to change that so that mayors will go into office in January. This won't go into effect in 2022, but the impact of that would be to move the election back into October, November, because people say this is not a good time to be electing a mayor when you're in the middle of Mardi Gras and Super Bowls and that sort of thing. That's too distracting, and so you have a better turnout if they could change the calendar.
Time it with the presidential elections then.
Yeah. And so there will be in November, the November federal election ballot, there will be a home rule charter proposal trying to change that schedule.
All right, Errol, thanks. Gordon.
I'm just going to say that I think the election is going to be fairly kind to incumbents. I don't think there's a lot of throw the bums out mentality right now.
All right, Don.
More construction downtown. This time, the Downtown Development District is getting ready to launch streetscape projects all around the museums, putting in brick sidewalks and lighting and landscaping. So just,
More, it just continues.
It continues
but
everywhere.
It's for our good. We know that. Mike?
Well, going back to crime and police, one very important weapon for the police is beefing up the police force. They're down to modern low, and the first big recruitment fair to try to fill these academy classes is tomorrow, and they're actively advertising on the radio, putting the word out.
Where is it going to be?
That's at one of the KIPP schools,
Okay.
and they're making a particular push to get military to go on the fast track to become police officers.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Want to see you next week for Informed Sources, and go Saints!